Your folding chair is by the kitchen. That's where plus ones sit.
Then this plus one is taking back her $5,000 gift and every unpaid wedding bill.
My name is Wanda Adams. I am 34 years old, and at my sister's wedding, every guest had a place card written in elegant gold script. Everyone except me. My former boyfriend had a seat. My sister's yoga friends had seats. Even a distant cousin who spent the entire ceremony filming with his phone had a seat. But I, the woman who had paid $19,000 toward the wedding, was given a folding chair beside the kitchen doors. When I asked my sister why, she looked at me in her beautiful white dress and said, with a careless little laugh, "That's where the plus ones sit." Something inside me finally went quiet. I walked to the gift table, picked up the silver box containing my $5,000 wedding check, and turned back toward her. Then this plus one is taking her gift home. I walked out beneath the fairy lights while the entire reception watched. My sister ran after me, furious that I was embarrassing her. My mother ordered me to go back inside and smile. Neither of them understood that the wedding bills had not finished arriving. They also did not understand that the folding chair was not the beginning of the story. It was the final entry in a 6-year ledger. I own a small accounting office outside Dayton, Ohio. It is not glamorous. 4 employees, 1 old coffee machine, and a bell that rings whenever someone opens the front door. But I built it myself. My clients are farmers, shopkeepers, retired teachers, and families who know the value of every dollar because they worked for it. My father, Frank Adams, taught me to respect numbers. He was a mechanic with rough hands and a warm heart. When I was a child, he would sit at the kitchen table with his checkbook and say, "Numbers don't lie, Wanda. People do the lying for them." I thought he was teaching me bookkeeping. I did not realize he was preparing me for my own family. Dad died 6 years before the wedding, after a heart operation the doctors had described as routine. His death left an empty chair at our kitchen table and an even larger emptiness in our lives. After the funeral, someone had to make sure my mother, Carol, could keep her house. Someone had to handle the insurance forms, the utility accounts, the leaking pipes, and all the expenses that arrived after the sympathy cards stopped. My younger sister, Madison, was still trying to finish her yoga certification. She needed help with tuition, transportation, and rent. No one formally asked me to become responsible for the family, but the responsibility simply slid toward me like a bill across a table, and I quietly accepted it. That is what happens when you are known as the strong one. People hand you more weight and then compliment you for standing straight. Every month, $650 left my bank account to cover my mother's utilities and homeowner's insurance. When her roof began leaking, I paid for a new one. When Madison's transmission failed just before her first teaching job, I paid for that too. I recorded everything in Dad's old green ledger. I did not plan to demand repayment. Keeping records was simply what I did. The ledger knew the truth, even when no one else wanted to acknowledge it. At church, my mother told people that she was managing beautifully on her own. She accepted admiration for her strength, while my payments kept the lights on behind the scenes. My name was never mentioned. For years, I told myself that credit did not matter. Mom was safe. Madison was building a future. Was that not the purpose of family? Then Madison became engaged, and I learned how easily generosity can be mistaken for obligation. She called me one Tuesday evening, laughing and breathless. "He proposed, Wanda!" Derek proposed at the Overlook. I was genuinely happy for her. Madison was 27, and when she became excited, she still sounded like the little girl who once danced through our father's warp wearing plastic fairy wings. Derek Whitfield came from a well-known local family. His parents had a large brick house, polished smiles, and holiday photographs that looked like advertisements. Derek sold medical equipment and drove an expensive leased truck. Everything about the Whitfields seemed carefully polished. My mother was thrilled. A Whitfield wedding, she kept saying, as though our family had received an invitation into royalty. Then she turned to me and said, "You know, a weddings cost about $36,000 these days." It was not a question. It was a forecast, and I was expected to provide the weather. Over the following weeks, the requests arrived one after another. Madison dreamed of a restored barn with fairy lights. Mom wanted a caterer recommended by Derek's mother. There had to be professional flowers, photography, music, and the right decorations. Whenever I hesitated, Mom used the one sentence she knew would reach me. "Your father would want his little girl to have a proper wedding." That night, I opened the green ledger to a blank page and wrote, "Madison's wedding." By spring, I had contributed $19,000, $8,000 for the venue, $6,500 for catering, $2,500 for flowers, and $2,000 for photography. The contracts carried my signature because the money came from my account. Yet whenever Derek's parents asked about the budget, my mother smiled and said, "We have taken care of everything. We believe in doing things properly." On my checks. Her performance. One afternoon, while Madison addressed invitations at my kitchen table, I asked, Does Derek's family know who is actually paying for all this? She continued writing without looking up. Why does it matter? It's family money. A family money. Those two words should have warned me. Instead, I watched her tie ribbons around the invitations and remembered doing her hair before school when we were children. I let it go. The first serious wound came in April. Madison asked me to meet her at a coffee shop. She stirred her drink for a long time before speaking. About the bridal party, she said. It will be my college friends and Derek's cousins. Patricia wants a certain look for the photographs. You understand, right? I understood perfectly. At 34, I was apparently too old or too ordinary to stand beside my younger sister in her wedding pictures. Is there a reason I keep being moved to the edge of this wedding? I asked. Madison reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Wanda, you are the backbone, not the decoration. You are the one who makes everything happen. It sounded affectionate until I understood its meaning. A backbone is essential, but it is hidden. It holds everything upright while no one looks at it. I checked the contracts that night. The deposits were non-refundable. Walking away would cost me the same amount and destroy my sister's wedding, so I stayed useful. The requests kept coming. Wanda, call the florist. Wanda, confirm the caterer. Wanda, solve the parking problem. They called me the backbone whenever they needed me to carry something. At the rehearsal dinner, I was seated at the far end of the table, beside the coffee station. Then my mother stood to make a toast. When Frank died, she said, lifting her glass, I promised myself that my youngest daughter would still have everything she dreamed of. And tonight, looking around this room, I can proudly say that I made it happen. The guests applauded. Patricia Whitfield dabbed her eyes. Derek raised his glass to my mother. I sat beside the coffee machine, holding a breadstick and listening to her accept praise for my sacrifice. My Aunt Ruth, my father's older sister, noticed my expression. Ruth was 66, direct, practical, and almost completely immune to manipulation. She found me near the coat rack later that evening. Frank used to say this family ran on one engine, she murmured. He meant you, honey. Before I could answer, Mom appeared and told me to check the parking arrangements. The next morning, at 7 o'clock, the florist called in a panic. Her refrigerated van had failed, and many of the centerpieces had wilted. Because my name was on the contract, the decision came to me. While Madison had her hair curled and Mom had her makeup done, I drove across town to a wholesale flower market. I bought every white rose and eucalyptus stem available, spending another $300. Then I hauled buckets to the venue and spent 2 hours, helping the florist's crew rebuild the arrangements. I texted Mom to explain the emergency. Her reply arrived instantly. Don't bother the girls. Handle it quietly. At the time, I mistook that for trust. The ceremony itself was beautiful. The white chairs faced an arch covered in flowers I had carried across town. Madison walked down the aisle with Dad's dark eyes and the same joyful bounce she had possessed since childhood. For a few precious minutes, all the hurt disappeared. She was my little sister, and I loved her. Then the officiant thanked the families who had made the day possible. My mother stood alone, waving gently as the guests applauded. I sat in the third row and clapped too. Habit can survive long after dignity begins to disappear. After the ceremony, everyone entered the barn for the reception. Fairy lights glowed between the wooden beams. Linen-covered tables filled the room, and beside the entrance stood hundreds of cards written in gold. I searched the A section. Abbott, Adams Carroll, Aldrich, Anderson. I searched again. There was no Wanda Adams. The wedding planner, Dana, checked her tablet. Her professional expression slowly became confused. You aren't on the final chart, she said. I'm terribly sorry. There is an overflow seat near the service doors. She led me past the family table, where my mother sat among the Whitfields, then past the band and the other guests. Beside the kitchen doors stood one brown folding chair covered with a white cloth. It had no table and no place card. Every time the doors opened, hot air and the smell of frying food rolled over it. I was still staring at the chair when Madison approached, surrounded by bridesmaids. There you are, she said brightly. Maddie, there has been a mistake. I don't have a place at any table. She glanced at the chair and laughed. Oh, that's the overflow seat. That's where the plus ones sit. Someone nearby chuckled. I looked across the room. My mother was laughing with Derek's father at the best table. My teenage cousin had a proper seat. Even Kyle Brennan, my former boyfriend, had a place card because he worked with Derek. The man I had once dated had a real seat at my sister's wedding. The woman who paid for the venue did not. In that moment, the entire picture became clear. For 6 years, I had confused being needed with being loved. I was welcome wherever a bill had to be paid, but invisible whenever a photograph was taken. I did not shout. I walked to the gift table, found the silver box with my name on it, and picked it up. Inside was a $5,000 check for the newlyweds. Madison watched me with growing alarm. "What are you doing?" I held the box against my side. "Taking back my gift. Plus ones don't give $5,000 checks." Then I walked out. Madison followed me into the parking lot, gathering her train in both hands. "You are embarrassing me at my own wedding," she shouted. "My seat is a folding chair beside the kitchen." "It is just logistics." "Why do you always make everything about yourself?" My mother arrived wearing the controlled smile she used whenever other people were watching. "Get back inside," she whispered. "Smile and do not ruin this family's day." "Pay for the first time," I said the number aloud. "Mom, I paid $19,000 for this day." She did not blink. Family doesn't keep receipts. Then she took Madison's arm and led her back toward the reception. I stood alone in the gravel with the gift box under my arm. The band began playing again before they reached the door. I drove home in silence. There were no tears that night. Instead, I made coffee, opened Dad's green ledger, and began an audit. I placed every wedding contract on the table. Then the bank statements showing 6 years of monthly transfers. The roof invoice. Madison's car repair. Page after page disappeared beneath proof of everything I had carried. The total was painful, but not as painful as realizing I had needed a total before I allowed myself to see the truth. When I lifted the ledger to close it, I noticed an old envelope tucked into a pocket inside the back cover. My name was written on the front in Dad's blocky handwriting. "For Wanda. When it gets heavy." My hands trembled as I opened it. Dad had written the letter 2 days before his surgery. He asked me to look after Mom because she often acted strong instead of feeling her fear. He asked me to guide Madison because she was softer than I was. Then came the words that changed everything. "I know which daughter will end up carrying this family, and I know what that can do to a person. Help is a gift, Wanda. A gift has to be received with respect, or it stops being giving. It becomes a bill nobody agreed to pay. Don't let love turn you into the family bank. A bank is only a building people visit when they want something. Be their family instead, even when that costs you less, and even when it costs them more." I read the letter 3 times. My father asked me to care for them. He had never asked me to disappear so they could shine. That night, I created a folder on my computer and named it "Closing the Family Books." On Monday morning, I tore up the $5,000 wedding check and placed a stop payment on it. Next, I emailed Madison, Derek, and Mom. A final wedding invoices totaling $9,400 were still unpaid. I informed them politely that I would not be covering those balances. Then I sent my mother a certified letter. Her monthly support would end in 60 days. I included an organized list of providers, due dates, and account numbers. I would not cut off her electricity without warning, but I would no longer finance a life from which I was erased. Finally, I withdrew from the mortgage meeting Madison and Derek had scheduled. Derek's commission income was unreliable, and they expected me to co-sign for their dream house. I sent one sentence: "I will not be attending." By Thursday, I had 17 missed calls. Mom's first messages were tearful. Her later messages were angry. She accused me of punishing the entire family over one chair. She even said Dad would be ashamed of me. Madison sent a furious text saying the videographer would not release their wedding film until the balance was paid. I replied, "Plus ones don't pay final invoices." Derek called from an unfamiliar number and told me we should act like adults. I agreed. "For 14 months, I misunderstood my role in your wedding. That misunderstanding has now been corrected." Then I ended the call. A few days later, Aunt Ruth invited me to her house. She poured coffee, sat across from me, and spoke without hesitation. "The seating chart was changed," she said. "I saw the original at the planner's office. You were at table 1 beside me, listed as sister of the bride. On the Friday before the wedding, your mother went to the venue alone to finalize details. At the rehearsal, Madison told me you had refused to sit with the family. Somebody fed her that lie. I contacted Dana and requested the original seating chart, the final version, and the revision history. She sent everything within an hour. The last entry read, "Final change requested Friday at 5:01 p.m. by Carol Adams." My mother had deliberately removed me from the family table. Then she told everyone that I had refused to sit with them. The folding chair had not been an accident. It had been part of her performance. When the unpaid caterer contacted Patricia Whitfield, Derek's mother finally called me. She had been told that Mom had contributed $30,000 to the wedding. I gave Patricia the facts for contracts. $19,000 in deposits, all paid by me. There was a long silence. "Then what did Carol pay for?" she asked. "The story," I answered. The next week, Madison and Derek attended their mortgage meeting without me. Without a reliable cosigner, the loan was rejected. Their dream house returned to the market, and they lost the $2,000 holding deposit. Madison stormed into my office that Monday. "You are destroying my life over one seat." I looked at the younger sister whose car, wedding, and future home I had been expected to finance. No, Maddie. I am doing this because of every seat that came before it. She moved toward the door, then stopped. Mom said you refused to sit with us, she said quietly. She said you wanted everyone to think you were better than the wedding. Ask her what she changed on Friday, at 5:41 p.m. For the first time, real confusion replaced the anger on Madison's face. My mother soon discovered how much her own life cost. The 60-day deadline approached, and for the first time since Dad's death, she had to read her insurance statement and pay attention to utility due dates. Rather than apologize, she arranged a family dinner. The Whitfields would attend. Aunt Ruth would attend. Madison and Derek would be there. Mom called me in a cold, commanding voice. You will come on Sunday. We are going to fix this family's reputation, and you will do your part. I will come, I said. I will bring dessert. What I did not mention was that I would also bring 5 folders. I prepared them as carefully as an audit. Each contained the vendor contracts, bank statements, roof invoice, car repair receipt, and my email declining the unpaid wedding balances. The final page showed the original and revised seating charts beside the planner's change log. Sunday evening, I arrived with a lemon cake in the folders. Through the front door, I heard Mom telling Patricia, Wanda has agreed to straighten everything out. She just needed time to calm down. She has always been dramatic. When Mom opened the door, she smiled broadly. There is our girl. 6 places had been arranged around the dining table with my grandmother's best china. For me, Mom had placed a metal folding chair in the corner beside the hutch. Why ran short of chairs? She said. Aunt Ruth raised her eyebrows. Patricia looked from the folding chair to me and said nothing. I sat down calmly and placed the folders in front of me. After dinner was served, Mom tapped her glass. Before dessert, Wanda would like to apologize for the scene at the wedding. She is also going to resume her little contributions to the family. Every face turned toward me. Actually, I said. I brought my apology in writing. I passed the folders around the table. Page 1 contains the 4 wedding contracts and my $19,000 in payments. Page 2 contains 6 years of transfers covering this house's utilities and insurance. You will also find the roof invoice and Madison's transmission repair. Paper rustled. No one spoke. I am not asking for repayment. I continued. I am correcting the record. Mom forced a laugh. Cold, ugly numbers. Wanda keeps score instead of loving people. Patricia lifted her eyes from the documents. Carol, you told us you paid $30,000. A mom sprang from her chair. She cried that she had raised 2 daughters alone. Aunt Ruth reminded her that Dad had died only 6 years earlier, when both daughters were already adults. Mom changed tactics. She called me selfish, bitter, and desperate for attention. When that failed, her voice became low and sharp. If you continue this, Wanda, you will have no family. Do you hear me? None. I remained seated. Mom, there is 1 page left. Madison looked up. What page? I carried the 2 seating charts to her. The original listed me at table 1 as sister of the bride. The final version erased my name. Beneath them was the revision log naming our mother. Madison read it twice. Her hand rose to cover her mouth. You moved her, she whispered. You told me she refused to sit with us. A mom claimed the computer record was wrong. When no one believed her, the truth escaped. I did it for you, she snapped. The Whitfields did not need Wanda sitting at that table, telling everyone who paid for what. They did not need to see our family's mess. Silence filled the room. Derek gave a nervous laugh. It was only 1 chair. Patricia turned slowly toward her son. You knew. I stood, folded the metal chair with 1 clean motion, and leaned it against the wall. The click of its hinges sounded louder than any shouting could have. You gave me the +1 seat, I said. Fine. But +1s do not cosign mortgages. +1s do not fund weddings. +1s do not pay a widow's insurance for 6 years. I looked directly at my mother. You told me family doesn't keep receipts. You were right. Family doesn't. +1s do, and you are the one who made me one. Then I turned to Madison. When you are ready to take responsibility for the words you said, not just the lie Mom gave you, you know where my office is. I picked up my purse and walked toward the door. Behind me, Mom shouted, Don't you dare walk out of this house. I looked back once. Watch me. This time no one ran after me. I had reached my car when the screen door opened. Aunt Ruth hurried down the path carrying her purse and 2 plates of lemon cake. Your father would have folded that chair exactly the same way, she said. We stood beneath the porch light, eating cake from my grandmother's china, while the Whitfields gathered their coats inside. Through the window, I saw my mother still talking, still trying to perform for people who were leaving. Madison remained at the table, staring at the seating chart. 3 weeks later, she came to my office alone. No Derek waited in the parking lot. No mother stood behind her. Madison wore a plain cardigan and carried an envelope. She sat in the chair across from my desk, a real chair, and handed me a check for $400. On the memo line, she had written, wedding balance. Payment one of many. Then she placed the folded seating chart beside it. Mom lied, she said. But the words at the reception were mine. No one forced me to say them. I chose the cruel answer, because it was easier to believe you were controlling and to admit how much I had taken from you. I am sorry, Wanda. I don't expect you to say it is fine, because it wasn't. She did not cry for sympathy. She did not ask me to erase the consequences. She asked for a payment plan. I accepted the check. I am an accountant. Sometimes forgiveness comes in installments. Madison and I began meeting for coffee on the first Friday of every month. We did not pretend everything had returned to normal. We started again as two adults who happened to share our father's eyes. Some conversations were easy, others were uncomfortable. But every one of them was honest, and honesty had become the only currency I trusted. Madison and Derek continued renting, while saving for a home their own income could support. She kept making payments, not because I demanded them, but because responsibility was part of her apology. My mother told anyone who would listen that her ungrateful daughter had abandoned her. Then she went home and paid her own electric bill. Her letters still arrive. I keep them unopened in my desk. I have not burned them, because reconciliation is still possible. But the door will open only after she takes responsibility for what she did at 5:41 on that Friday afternoon. One evening, I opened Dad's green ledger and turned past 6 years of emergencies, bills and sacrifices. On the final page, I wrote one last entry. My own seat, paid in full. Then I closed the cover. For the first time in years, the sound did not feel like an ending. It felt like freedom. Here is what I finally learned. If someone hands you a folding chair after you helped build the table, do not waste your life arguing about where they seated you. Stand up. Take back what keeps the table standing. Then watch how quickly they remember your name.